Have you ever craved a cake that not only tastes incredible, but looks like it belongs in a bakery window? Well, today I'm making a red velvet bundt cake that's rich, velvety, and guaranteed to impress. Whether you're celebrating Valentine's Day or just craving something indulgent, this cake has got you covered. I'm talking about buttery soft texture, deep cocoa flavor, and that classic red hue that makes it so special. And to top it all off, are finishing with a smooth cream cheese frosting and fresh strawberries. Trust me, this is a dessert worth making. Let's jump in. Before I start, let's get everything measured and ready. I have learned the hard way that scrambling for ingredients mid-recipe is a surefire way to forget something important. Having everything prepped beforehand makes the process smooth and stress-free. The foundation of any great cake starts with the dry ingredients. Each one plays an essential role in achieving the perfect texture and taste. First, I have 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. This ingredient is the backbone of our cake, giving it structure and ensuring it holds together while staying light and fluffy. Next, I add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You might not think salt belongs in a cake, but trust me, it enhances all the flavors and balances out the sweetness, preventing the cake from tasting one-dimensional. Then there's 1 teaspoon of baking powder. This is our magic ingredient that helps the cake rise. Without it, I'd have a dense, heavy cake instead of a beautifully soft and airy one. Finally, I incorporate 1/2 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. This is what gives our red velvet cake that slight hint of chocolate, making it unique and irresistibly rich. The cocoa also deepens the color, pairing beautifully with the red food coloring later on. I whisk these ingredients together to evenly distribute them, ensuring no surprise clumps of baking powder or salt in the final batter. If you don't have a whisk, a simple fork will do the trick. I whisk these together to evenly distribute the ingredients, ensuring that each bite of cake has a balanced flavor and texture. This step also helps prevent clumps of baking powder or cocoa, which could create unpleasant surprises in the final product. If you don't have a whisk, a simple fork will do the job just fine. This is my process for most of my baked goods. I always prep my dry ingredients first and then move on to the wet ingredients. It makes the process much easier and keeps everything organized rather than adding ingredients one at a time and risking overmixing or forgetting something along the way. Now that our dry ingredients are ready, it's time to bring in the wet ones. These ingredients will add moisture, richness, and depth of flavor, ensuring our cake is soft and packed with taste. First, I have 4 eggs. Eggs are the glue that holds our cake together. They help bind all the ingredients while adding structure and richness. Without them, the cake would crumble apart instead of holding that beautiful bundt shape. Next, I add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. This might seem like a small amount, but vanilla plays a huge role in enhancing the overall flavor. It gives a warm, aromatic depth that complements the cocoa and balances the sweetness beautifully. Finally, I pour in 1 cup of buttermilk. This is our secret ingredient for achieving a perfectly moist cake. Buttermilk has a subtle tang that not only adds flavor, but also reacts with the baking powder to create a light, tender crumb. If you don't have buttermilk on hand, don't worry. You can make a quick substitute by mixing 1 cup of milk with a tablespoon of vinegar or lemon juice. Let it sit for a few minutes, and you've got yourself a homemade buttermilk alternative that works just as well. I continue by adding 1 cup of room temperature butter to a large mixing bowl. Butter is the foundation of this cake's texture. At room temperature, it blends effortlessly with sugar, creating a smooth, creamy base. If it's too cold, it won't incorporate properly, leaving lumps behind. If it's melted, the batter won't hold air, resulting in a dense cake. The perfect consistency is soft and pliable, making it easy to whip into a light, airy mixture. Next, I add 2 cups of sugar to the bowl. Sugar does more than just sweeten. It's essential for texture. As it mixes with butter, it creates tiny air pockets, aerating the batter and ensuring a tender, bakery-style crumb. Skipping or rushing the step could leave you with dense cake instead of the soft, delicate bundt I'm aiming for. I use a hand mixer to beat the butter and sugar together. As they mix, the color lightens and the texture becomes fluffy. This is a sign that enough air has been incorporated. This process takes about 3 to 5 minutes, and patience is key. The longer you cream, the better the final texture. If you don't have a hand mixer, a sturdy whisk will do the trick, though it takes more effort. Just keep mixing in circular motions until you achieve that smooth, fluffy consistency. The key here is patience. Whipping in enough air is what makes this cake melt in your mouth soft. Once the butter and sugar are perfectly creamed, the mixture should be pale, smooth, and slightly glossy. That's my cue that it's time to move on to the next step. The foundation of a great cake is in the details, and this creaming process sets us up for success. I mix the eggs, buttermilk, and vanilla into the butter and sugar mixture, blending until smooth and well combined. This keeps the batter silky and prevents curdling. Next, I add the dry ingredients and mix with a hand mixer on low speed, just until everything is incorporated. Over mixing can lead to a dense cake, so I keep a close eye, stopping as soon as the batter looks smooth. Even with a simple hand mixer, a light touch is all it takes to keep the texture soft and fluffy. Did you know that bundt cakes actually have a pretty cool history? They may seem like a classic American dessert, but their roots go way back to Europe, specifically Germany and Austria. There, people made a type of cake called Gugelhupf, which was a yeasted, fruit-studded cake baked in a decorative, ring-shaped pan. It was super popular, especially for special occasions. Fast forward to the 1950s, when a group of Jewish women from Minnesota wanted to recreate the traditional Gugelhupf from their homeland. They reached out to a company called Nordic Ware and asked them to design a similar pan. The company tweaked the design, using aluminum and adding those signature ridges, and boom, the Bundt pan was born. At first, bundt cakes weren't all that popular. But everything changed in the 1960s when a recipe called the Tunnel of Fudge Cake won second place in a Pillsbury baking contest. People went crazy for it, and suddenly everyone wanted a bundt pan. Sales skyrocketed, and the bundt cake became a staple in American kitchens. What makes bundt cakes so fun is that they're more about the shape than a specific recipe. You can make them in all sorts of flavors: chocolate, lemon, pumpkin spice, red velvet, like the one I just made. You name it. The pan does all the work in making them look fancy, so even a simple recipe turns out stunning. So next time you bake a bundt cake, just remember, it's not just a delicious dessert, it's a little piece of history shaped to perfection. And now, the most exciting part, red food coloring. This is where the cake transforms from a rich cocoa-infused batter into the vibrant red velvet beauty I know and love. I carefully measure 1.5 teaspoons of liquid red food coloring and drizzle it into the bowl. As I begin to mix, the batter slowly takes on that deep signature hue, blending beautifully with the cocoa and buttermilk. If you don't have liquid food coloring, don't worry. Gel food coloring is an excellent alternative. Just remember, it's more concentrated, so you'll only need a small amount, about 1/2 teaspoon to start. I always recommend adding the coloring gradually until you reach your desired shade. Kohl is a bold red that stands out but still maintains that classic velvety richness. If you want to experiment, there are also natural food coloring options made from beet powder or pomegranate juice. While they won't be as vibrant, they provide a more subtle, earthy red tone for a more natural take on red velvet. Once the color is fully incorporated, I take a moment to admire the transformation. It's like watching magic happen in the mixing bowl. With the batter now beautifully red, it's time to move on to the next step, prepping the bundt pan. Before I even think about pouring the batter, I take a moment to prepare the bundt pan. This step is crucial. There's nothing worse than putting all that effort into a cake only for it to stick to the pan. Trust me, I've been there. And it's not fun scraping pieces of cake out of the pan instead of admiring a beautiful, intact bundt. I start with 1 tablespoon of vegetable shortening and use a sandwich bag over my hand to spread it evenly across every nook and cranny of the pan, making sure no spot is left dry. If you want to get fancy, disposable vinyl gloves work great too. I've been using them a lot lately when baking. Those intricate bundt pan designs may look stunning, but they're also notorious for trapping cake. A thorough greasing is the key to ensuring a clean, flawless release when you flip the cake out. No one wants half their cake stuck to the pan. Next, I grab 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour and sprinkle it evenly over the greased pan. I either do this by hand or use a small sifter for a more even dusting. Then, I rotate and tap the pan, ensuring the flour coats every surface. This creates a protective barrier between the batter and the pan, helping the cake slide out effortlessly once baked. If you don't have shortening, butter works just fine. Just be sure to coat every inch thoroughly. Another great alternative is a non-stick baking spray with flour. It's an all-in-one solution that saves time and makes this step even easier. Just be sure to spray from a distance to get an even coating without pooling in one area. With the pan now perfectly prepped, I take a moment to appreciate that this simple yet essential step is going to make all the difference when it's time to reveal the finished cake. Now, are finally ready to pour in the batter. I pour the batter evenly into the prepared bundt pan, making sure it's smooth on top so it bakes evenly. A level batter helps ensure the cake rises uniformly without creating any uneven spots. Into the preheated 350-degree Fahrenheit oven, it goes for 50 to 65 minutes. Baking time can vary depending on altitude. If you're at a higher altitude, above 3,000 feet, you may need to slightly reduce the baking temperature to 325 degrees Fahrenheit and check for doneness a little earlier, as baked goods tend to cook faster at higher elevations. If you're unsure when it's done, insert a toothpick in the center. If it comes out clean, it's ready. After baking, I let it cool in the pan for 10 minutes before flipping it onto a cooling rack. This brief resting period allows the cake to set while still releasing easily. If you don't have a cooling rack, a large plate works fine. Just make sure air can circulate so the cake cools evenly. However, patience is key. Cooling completely before adding any frosting is essential. If the cake is still warm, the frosting will melt right off instead of spreading smoothly. For the best results, I let the cake cool for at least 1 hour at room temperature, ideally around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 degrees Celsius. If the kitchen is warm, it may take up to 2 hours to cool fully. To be sure the cake is ready for frosting, I sometimes check the temperature with a digital kitchen thermometer. The cake should be around 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees Celsius or cooler before frosting. If it's still above that, I give it more time. Rushing this step can ruin the final look and texture. While my bundt cake is cooling, I take care of 2 important steps: prepping the strawberries and making the frosting. If the cake is even slightly warm, the frosting will melt instead of forming that beautiful thick layer. Patience is key. Waiting until the cake reaches room temperature ensures a flawless finish. The final touch to this red velvet bundt cake is a rich, smooth cream cheese frosting. It's luscious, slightly tangy, and perfectly balances the sweetness of the cake. I start by washing the strawberries in a vinegar solution, a simple mix of 1 part vinegar to 3 parts water. This helps remove dirt, bacteria, and any lingering pesticides while also extending their freshness. I let them soak for about 5 minutes, then rinse them thoroughly under cold running water to ensure there's no vinegar taste left behind. For a step-by-step guide on how I properly wash and prep fresh berries, check out my video, The Best Way to Clean and Store Fresh Strawberries. Next, I slice the strawberries in half, making sure to keep them looking uniform and beautiful for decorating. To keep them from browning or losing their bright red color, I place them in a bowl of cold water mixed with fruit fresh produce protector. This step is key for maintaining their freshness, color, and texture, especially if I'm prepping them ahead of time. For more details on how I use fruit fresh and other methods to keep fruit looking fresh longer, check out my video, How to Keep Strawberries Fresh and Bright for Hours. Now that the strawberries are prepped and picture perfect, I begin with 2.5 cups of powdered sugar, which gives the frosting both structure and the right level of sweetness. I like to sift it first to prevent any lumps, ensuring a silky smooth texture. Next, I add 4 ounces of room temperature cream cheese. This is the star ingredient, providing that signature tangy flavor. Using cream cheese at room temperature is essential for a smooth blend, preventing any clumps in the frosting. For extra depth, I stir in 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Even a small amount enhances the flavor and complements the cake's cocoa undertones beautifully. To get the perfect drizzle consistency, I add 3 tablespoons of milk. This helps thin the frosting just enough to flow effortlessly over the cake. If it's still too thick, I add more milk, 1 teaspoon at a time, until I reach the ideal texture. Once everything is in the bowl, I grab my hand mixer and beat the ingredients until the frosting is smooth, creamy, and glossy. No hand mixer? No problem. A strong whisk works too. It just takes a little more elbow grease. The key is to keep mixing until there are no lumps and the frosting has a light, velvety finish. At first, my frosting turned out a bit too runny, so I added a little more powdered sugar to thicken it up. Just a small adjustment made all the difference, bringing it back to the perfect consistency for drizzling. Now that the frosting is just right, it's time to bring this Red Velvet Bundt Cake to life. You know what's cool about strawberries? Their peak season in the USA is usually from April to June, but it depends on where you are. California grows about 90% of the nation's strawberries. Crazy, right? Florida is another big player, especially in the winter, and up in Oregon and Washington. They're famous for those super sweet and juicy summer strawberries. Here's something fun. Strawberries can taste a little different depending on where they're grown. California berries tend to be larger and firm with mild sweetness, making them great for shipping and snacking. Florida strawberries are often smaller and have a tart edge that's perfect for desserts. And those summer berries from Oregon and Washington, they're known for being super sweet and soft, almost like nature's candy. It's amazing how much the region can influence the flavor. Oh, and here's a fun little nugget. Strawberries love well-drained soil and lots of sunshine, which is why they thrive in those places. And get this, the average American eats around 8 pounds of strawberries a year. I mean, who can blame us? They're so good. I start by placing the fully cooled cake on a cake stand. To make cleanup easier, I sometimes slip small pieces of parchment paper under the edges of the cake. This catches any drips and can be removed afterward for a neat presentation. I slowly drizzle the frosting over the top of the cake, letting it naturally flow down the ridges. I work my way around, allowing the frosting to cascade beautifully, creating that signature bundt cake look. If I want a thicker layer, I go over certain areas twice, making sure the frosting settles evenly. For extra control, I sometimes use a piping bag or a zip-top bag with a small corner snipped off. This lets me guide the frosting exactly where I want it, while still keeping that elegant, drizzled effect. Once the frosting is set, I take it up a notch by adding fresh strawberries, some on top and others arranged beautifully around the base of the cake. The vibrant red berries not only complement the rich red velvet color, but also add a fresh, juicy contrast to the creamy frosting. Now, with the final touches in place, I take a moment to admire the cake. It's a showstopper. All that's left to do is slice, serve, and enjoy. If you have leftovers, lucky you. Here's how to store your cake properly, so you can enjoy every bite just as fresh as the day it was baked. First, if you plan to finish the cake within a few days, storing it at room temperature is the easiest option. I place the cake in an airtight container and keep it in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight. This keeps the cake moist and delicious for up to 3 days. If you don't have an airtight container, wrapping it tightly in plastic wrap or aluminum foil works just as well. If you need to store it a bit longer, the refrigerator is a great choice. I transfer the cake to an airtight container and refrigerate it for up to 5 days. Before serving, I always let it come back to room temperature, usually about 30 minutes to an hour, so the texture softens and the flavors shine. For long-term storage, freezing is the best method. To freeze the entire cake, I first wrap it tightly in plastic wrap, making sure no part is exposed to air. Then, I place it in a freezer-safe bag or airtight container to prevent freezer burn. If I'm freezing individual slices, I wrap each slice separately before placing them in a freezer bag. This way, I can thaw only the portions I need. The cake stays fresh for up to 3 months in the freezer. When I'm ready to enjoy it, I transfer the cake to the refrigerator overnight to thaw slowly, then bring it to room temperature before serving for the best texture and flavor. One final tip: if the cake seems a bit dry after refrigeration or freezing, a quick 10-second zap in the microwave can bring back some of that freshly baked moisture, making it taste like it just came out of the oven. If you need to take this cake somewhere, make sure it arrives in one piece. I recommend using a cake carrier or placing it in a deep box with non-slip padding underneath to prevent sliding. I actually have a separate video where I show you the most budget-friendly and efficient way to transport cakes, so be sure to check that out if you need some extra tips. If you're on the hunt for more Valentine's Day treats, be sure to check out my next video, Why Everyone is Obsessed with this Valentine's Charcuterie Board. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. See you there. I've also left the full recipe and links to all the tools I used in the description below, so you can easily grab everything you need. And there you have it, a stunning, moist, and flavor-packed red velvet bundt cake. The rich cocoa, tangy cream cheese frosting, and juicy fresh strawberries come together in absolute dessert perfection. If you try this recipe, I'd love to hear how it turns out. And if you enjoyed baking with me today, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss another delicious creation. Also, drop a comment. What's your favorite Valentine's Day dessert? I'd love to know. Happy baking, and I'll see you in my next video.